The night had teeth. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on the skin but dug deep into bone, sharp and relentless. At the small town train station, the snow whipped sideways under the dim yellow glow of flickering lamps. The platform was deserted, save for Amelia, a nurse whose weary eyes told stories of exhaustion that words couldn't capture. She sat on a hard wooden bench, her thin hospital coat pulled tight across her frame, though it did little to protect her from the icy wind cutting through the air. Her shift at the city hospital had ended hours ago. 12 hours of non-stop emergencies, accidents from icy roads, children with fevers, and elderly patients struggling against pneumonia. By the time she stumbled out into the night, she was too late for her bus and barely caught the last train. Now, stranded at this lonely station after a delay was announced, she felt as though fate was testing her. Her breath came out in wide puffs, disappearing instantly into the darkness, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She tucked her hands under her arms, whispering softly to herself, "Just hold on a little longer, Amelia." But there was no warmth, no shelter, no friendly face. The station clock ticked loudly, each second dragging as if mocking her patience. The few shops nearby had closed hours earlier, their signs dark, windows shuttered. Snow piled higher at the corners of the platform, and the silence of the place was broken only by the occasional moan of the wind. Despite her shivering, Amelia's mind kept drifting back to her patients. The little boy with asthma who had smiled at her when she fixed his nebulizer. The frail old woman who whispered, "Thank you, dear," before finally resting. It was moments like those that made the exhaustion and loneliness worth it. But now, sitting in the freezing dark, she wondered if anyone ever thought to care for her. Then, just as her eyes began to close from fatigue, a sound rose above the howling wind. It was faint at first, steady, rhythmic, deliberate. Clop, clop, clop. Amelia frowned and leaned forward, her breath fogging in the air as she strained to listen. Horses. Out here. The sound grew louder, closer, echoing off the empty station walls until she finally saw a shadow moving through the snow. A tall figure astride a horse emerged from the white blur, his silhouette framed by the dim light. The sight was so surreal she thought for a moment her tired mind was playing tricks on her. Who rode horses in a blizzard to a train station in the middle of nowhere? The rider drew nearer, and the details came into focus: a wide-brimmed hat sprinkled with snow, a heavy coat that reached nearly to the stirrups, and eyes that caught hers with unexpected warmth. He dismounted smoothly, his boots crunching on the snow-covered platform. For a moment, he simply studied her, as though he was trying to understand why a woman like her would be left alone in such a place. "Ma'am," his voice rang low, deep, and steady against the wind, "you'll freeze to death sitting out here." Amelia's lips parted, but words refused to come. He looked like he'd stepped right out of a storybook, part guardian angel, part cowboy legend. And in that moment, shivering and speechless, Amelia knew her life had just shifted course in a way she couldn't yet explain. His name was Jameson Hart, though most people in the county simply called him Hart the Cowboy. Born to a rancher's family, he had grown up in the saddle, herding cattle long before he learned to drive a car. Over the years, grit and shrewd decisions turned his family's modest land into one of the largest ranches in the state. Investments in cattle, horses, and even land development transformed him into a millionaire, though nothing about his manner reflected arrogance. Despite his wealth, Jameson preferred worn leather boots to polished shoes and a saddle to the backseat of a limousine. On nights like this, when storms rolled across the plains, he made it his ritual to check the town for anyone stranded. He said it was a habit instilled by his late father: "Always keep an eye out, son. Storms don't care about a man's pride." That night, fate drew his horse toward the train station, where a lone figure sat trembling in the snow. Amelia hesitated as he stepped closer, the crunch of his boots echoing in the hollow silence of the station. Her instincts as a nurse made her cautious. She had met enough strangers in the city to know that trust could be dangerous. Yet there was something in his steady gaze, something unspoken but reassuring. "You're shaken like a leaf," he said gently, shrugging off his heavy wool coat. Before she could protest, he draped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, enveloping her like a shield against the night. Amelia exhaled in relief, though she still hugged her arms tightly, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "I'll be fine," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. "The train will come soon." Jameson gave the empty tracks a knowing glance. "Not tonight, it won't. They'll keep it grounded till the storm clears. That could be hours, maybe till morning." Her heart sank at the thought of staying on that frozen bench until dawn. She bit her lip, torn between pride and the simple need for safety. "Let me take you somewhere warm," he offered, his tone calm but firm. "My ranch ain't far. Big fire, hot tea. You don't have to sit here and suffer." Amelia studied him for a long moment, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. She thought of her patients, how she always told them to accept help when they needed it. Why was it so hard for her to follow her own advice? Finally, she nodded faintly. Jameson's lips curved into the smallest smile as he helped her to her feet. He guided her toward his horse, a towering chestnut stallion that stamped its hooves impatiently in the snow. "This here's Duke," he said, patting the animal's neck. "He's steady, won't let you fall." Amelia's knees trembled, partly from cold, partly from nerves. She had never been on a horse before, but Jameson lifted her gently into the saddle as though she weighed nothing. He climbed up behind her, his presence solid and warm, his coat still wrapped snug around her. The ride through the storm was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Snow stung her cheeks, but the steady rhythm of Duke's hooves and the protective arm Jameson held around her made her feel safe in a way she hadn't in years. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to lean back, resting slightly against him. By the time they reached his ranch, Amelia was half asleep, lulled by the ride and the warmth of his body. The sprawling house glowed like a beacon against the dark landscape, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, a roaring fire cast golden light across the wooden walls. Jameson settled her into a chair near the hearth, his voice soft as he handed her a steaming cup of tea he brewed himself. Amelia sipped slowly, her chilled fingers thawing against the mug. She glanced up at him, surprised at how attentive he was. No assistant, no housekeeper fussing, just him, moving about with easy confidence. He wasn't like the wealthy men she had seen in hospital suits, who barked orders and looked at her as though she were invisible. No, Jameson's heart was different. He was grounded, sincere, protective without being overbearing. And as she watched him toss another log into the fire, Amelia realized she wasn't just warming from the storm outside. Something inside her heart was thawing too. The snowstorm that night lasted far longer than anyone expected. What Amelia thought would be a single evening of refuge stretched into days. Roads were blocked, the trains stayed frozen on their tracks, and the town seemed cut off from the world. For Amelia, those days at Jameson Hart's ranch became a turning point she never anticipated. At first, she worried about overstaying her welcome. She tried to help around the ranch, folding blankets, tidying the kitchen, even offering to cook. But Jameson only chuckled softly, saying, "You've done enough work. Savin lives in that hospital. Here, you're the guest. Let me do the rest." Still, Amelia found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life. She watched Jameson feed the horses in the biting cold, split firewood with easy strength, and brew coffee each morning like clockwork. What surprised her most wasn't the grandeur of the sprawling property, or the wealth he so clearly possessed. It was his humility. He spoke often of his late father, of the lean years before success, of the land he nearly lost before turning everything around. He never spoke with pride, only with gratitude. "Everything I got," he said one night as they sat by the fire, "comes from hard work and people who believed in me. Money don't mean much if you forget who you are." Amelia, listening with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, felt something stir deep within her. For so long, she had lived in service of others, her patients, her family, but rarely allowed herself to dream of more. Jameson's presence made her wonder if she deserved something beyond duty. Something like belonging. Over the course of those stormbound days, they talked for hours. She told him about her childhood, about the nights she sat up with her little brother when he was sick, how that planted the seed that grew into her calling as a nurse. Jameson listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. And in return, she listened to him. He spoke of horses with the same passion she spoke of medicine, of the land as though it were a living friend. When the storm finally broke, the sun revealed a world remade in white. Roads cleared slowly, and soon life in the town stirred again. Amelia knew she could return to her small apartment, to her endless shifts and quiet, solitary evenings. Yet as she stood by the ranch's front door, coat bundled around her, she felt an ache at the thought of leaving. Jameson noticed. He tipped his hat back, studying her with eyes both gentle and steady. "You know," he said slowly, "I found you freezing at that station, but truth is, I think I was the one waiting to be found." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world went still. Weeks later, when spring melted the last of the snow, Jameson made good on a promise to himself. He rode with Amelia back to the very train station where they first met. The bench where she had shivered through the storm was still there, though the air now smelled of rain instead of ice. Jameson knelt before her, hat in his hands, and asked her to marry him. The town erupted with joy at the news. Their story spread far beyond county lines. Newspapers called it a modern-day fairy tale, the millionaire cowboy and the nurse who had nothing but her courage and her heart. A song was even written about them, and years later, a bronze plaque was placed at the train station bench, marking it as the spot where love rewrote history. For Amelia and Jameson, it was never about the wealth, the fame, or the legend they became. It was about two lives colliding on a freezing night, and the warmth that grew when kindness was met with trust. And long after their hair had turned silver, people would still tell their story, the night a cowboy on horseback found a nurse in the snow. And together, they discovered a love that could weather any storm.